Hello and welcome to the Courageous Influence Talk Show, where we have courageous conversations that help build people of courageous influence. I'm your host, Alex Cuttiford, and I'm joined by my mate and pastor, Caleb Dwyer.
Well, hello.
How are you, mate?
I'm good. How are you?
You loving life?
Very much so.
You
Always
excited?
Excited about
Everything.
everything.
Yeah. The show?
Yeah, no, there's good things happening.
Yeah.
Lots to be excited for.
Awesome. All right. Well, I thought we could launch into it. Now, this morning I was about to launch into a story with you, and then we thought we'll save it for the show.
Okay.
And I was about to start talking about some of my greatest regrets.
Yes.
And so here's what's happened. On the weekend, there's been the Hall of Fame inductees.
For the AFL?
For the AFL. And one of them is Lenny Hayes.
Great choice.
Absolute champion.
Yes.
Tough as nails.
I thought there was a few good choices this year. Very good.
Yeah, there was a lot. There was an Eagle, Dean Cox.
Well
Brilliant.
deserved.
Yeah.
But I reckon he was like the first or the prototype of those big men that were more than just a ruckman.
Well, that's what they were talking about. He really changed. Like they.
Yes, I know my stuff.
Yeah. Do you know how they have a different player will talk about them and share a bit of a story about playing with them?
Yeah.
And so they had Juddy talking about Dean Cox.
Oh, awesome.
And that's the way, like, he got his art to the point that, like, such was his dominance, was the word, that he didn't just want to win the tap. He actually wanted to get the ball spinning like a drop punt to make it easier for the on-ballers to get hold of.
Wow.
And, like, all of this stuff.
What was this? What was it on a television channel?
Oh, it was just on the AFL app.
Okay.
They were.
Like,
I
I'd be
saw
able to go
the
back and
highlights.
watch it, 'cause that'd be a great interview.
There's some highlights from it from the night.
Because that midfield dominated.
Yeah.
And
so
his
they were
tap work
showing-
too.
Oh, man, they were showing
Juddy,
some of it.
Kerr,
So
Cousins.
The best one was, so they had their different plays and they said that each of their different plays was named after a different racetrack in Perth. And one of them, I forget the name of the track, but he hated that one because he got no credit for it, because the plan was that it would go over both of the ruckman's head without either of them touching it. So he would move them under the ball and just let it drop.
Yeah,
behind,
okay.
And the player knew to run right in underneath him.
Yeah, okay.
Around the back. And so he hated that one because he got no credit because he didn't get a touch.
Even though really he did the work to move the other guy back. Yeah.
But anyway, that's not my regret. I was very happy about that. My regret is, so one of my best mates when I was living in Canberra, his cousin was good mates with Lenny Hayes. And one day, and we went to his Bucks party, me and my mate. And when we were there, and he's like, oh, yeah. And he's like legitimately really good mates with him. Oh, yeah, Lenny gave me a couple of his shorts and they're signed. And he gave me and my mate Sam a pair of Lenny Hayes signed shorts.
Some you wore them.
I've lost them.
Oh, no.
Long gone. No idea where they are.
Oh.
So that is shattering. So now there's a Hall of Famer who I could have had a signed pair.
You could have a signed pair
I
of
could have
footy
had
shorts.
them framed. I loved Lenny. I watched Lenny at the grand final in 2010 just dominate. It was awesome. And then now I've lost his signed shorts.
What a shame.
Were they used?
Yeah, like played in them.
Like sweat, poop stained, a lot.
Yeah, well, they weren't poop stained. But
Possibly, depending who he played against.
yeah, well,
But that's awesome.
Yeah.
And pretty disappointing to lose them.
yeah, disappointing. So maybe a bit of an exaggeration to be one of my greatest regrets, but
Yeah.
not fun.
No, not fun. Not something excited about. Glad about that day I lost those shorts.
Yeah.
I always find that when people wear clothing that's been autographed and then they're going to wash it, I'm like, not if it's someone you're right there, mate.
Yeah.
If it's someone that you really respect or someone who's going to go on and become an All-Australian, you don't want to be washing that and fading the signature.
Yeah.
It's got to be kept.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's some regrets and some stuff that's going on in the AFL world. Do we want to go into talking about our leadership tips for this week?
Yeah, let's do it.
What have you got to share with us, mate?
So, as a leader, I must be willing to risk the consequences of a life lived deliberately rather than accepted.
Living with the consequences.
We're living with the consequences of a life lived deliberately. I actually think it goes beyond just leaders. Like, we should all want to live that way.
Yeah.
And the idea is that there's lots that we do unthinkingly, even with the way that we live, the way that we structure our lives. So much of it is cultural. It's from our family of origin, but it's also greatly influenced by the society that we live in and the culture that we live in.
Yeah.
And it's not all good. Like every culture has downsides and every culture has upsides.
Absolutely.
It's certainly something I realised having had the privilege of doing quite a bit of international work, and you go to other cultures that are vastly different from the Western culture, and some of the ways that they live, I just think, man, it just makes so much sense. They prioritise things that we don't. Other things, I'm like, yeah, I feel much more comfortable in my Aussie skin. But so the idea is that we would be a people who actually decide to live a life that is deliberately chosen, not just because that's the way we do it. And then we have to be willing to live with the consequences of that.
Yeah.
And if you're making deliberate choices, you're hoping those consequences are predominantly positive, but they won't always be. So, for example, one of the things that I've made a deliberate choice on, and we've discussed it a little bit on the show, is just changing some of my priorities, where I really want to make sure that I'm prioritising time with my family. I'm prioritising. So even, for example, I had some things I was going to be doing tonight, and I've just rescheduled them simply because my daughter needs some help with her homework. Yeah, and that's important to me. And so I've rescheduled things, and there's going to be great consequences out of that. Like already, I'm finding that the girls are coming to me with a lot more of their problems than they were. They just automatically go to mum because dad's not around enough. Yeah, that's starting to shift. That's a great consequence. But the reality of it is that means that there might be some work opportunities that I have to say no to. And there are consequences now, particularly if you're in a corporate setting, more so than where I work. That might mean that there are promotions that you miss out on. Right? And that's a consequence. And so we have to be willing to live with the consequences of a life that's lived deliberately. Yeah. And be cool with that, whether they be negative or positive, and realise otherwise I'm just going to live frustrated and think that I should be allowed to live and take that time off and not do that and still get that promotion. Well, that's not the way the world works. And you're going to live bitter, or you're going to think that everyone needs to bend to how you want to live life, or you just go, no, you know what? I'm living my life deliberately, and I know that's a consequence of it, but I'm actually at peace with that.
Yeah, that's it. It's like no matter what direction you go in life, you're going to have costs, and it's like you want to pay the cost at the end of your life. You're glad you paid them, rather than getting to the end of life and the costs that you paid, you have great regrets about why did I choose that, and the cost was just too great. And being willing to actually step back and assess what are all the different costs that I'm paying and the different things that I'm doing. And yeah, it's definitely something that I've been thinking about a lot myself lately, just like, what to prioritize and for how long, and recognizing different seasons of life. It's it's something that you really do need to do. It's interesting, the whole thing of the subconscious things that we do and the stuff we do just because of our culture and society, and that's just the way things are. But even when you try to stop and think about it, it's like being able to recognize, well, even the way that I'm thinking about it is all influenced by the way that we think, and it can be a really tricky thing sometimes to navigate.
I think that's why, one, you do it in community, so you have some close friends that you trust to talk through some of these things, and disruptions are really good for us. So clearly there's been some phenomenal negative impacts of COVID, and I don't want to paper over that, but the disruption itself can actually be a positive in people's lives. It's one of the positives, I think, that certainly going to other cultures, being outside of yours, some of the biggest decisions that Rennes and I have made in our life, we've actually made while we've been overseas, because it takes us out of, it's the old, the frog in hot water, and it's getting hot all around the frog and it doesn't realise. Yeah. That's what it's like to live in a culture. And when you sit outside of that, especially if you can do it for, a period of time, you can begin to see things a lot more clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think disruptions, that's probably another great leadership thing, is that disruptions are good. Disruptions stop us getting in a rut, and they force us to look at things differently, but creativity comes out of that, and a sense of perspective often comes out of disruptions that we otherwise wouldn't have got.
Yeah, no, that's good. I even think some of the biggest shifts in my life have come when I was overseas as well. So, yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, being able to get yourself out, because you get so caught up worrying about what other people think about you and stuff.
Yep.
And that just locks you into a life that you just don't even want to live.
Yes.
And so you're living a life that you don't want to live, trying to please someone else, and they often just don't even care.
They don't
about the thing
care.
that you're doing. Like, yeah, so yeah, it's funny traps that we get ourselves in.
Yeah. Yes.
Definitely.
What about you? What have you got for us this week?
So what I was just thinking about was the importance of momentum in life. And it's been interesting. I feel like I've had a couple of moments in life where I've, I guess, been on a certain track, whether it's of ministry or work or whatever. And it's sort of momentum has been building and for different reasons have had to stop. And you could think of that in quite a negative sense, but at the same time, it's just sort of, I guess, gearing up for the future. And, I'm 30 now.
Yes, you are.
So I've only just come out of my 20s. So I think that's something that you can look at and recognise, through your 20s, you're trying a few different things. And so you could think of it as a setback, but it's not necessarily. It's just that you've tried a few things. But this idea of momentum is a really important thing in life, because we're sort of, at the moment, we're really in the grind of saving. We're trying to get together a deposit to buy a home. And so we're in that moment and when you think about the way I was actually thinking about momentum, I was picturing driving up your new driveway.
You certainly need some momentum to get up there.
There's a big bumpy hill. And I watched Mark Tipper get up it somehow.
In a truck.
Big truck. But when you think about momentum, there are times where to keep the momentum, you have to keep your foot down and keep ploughing ahead. And to stop would be extremely detrimental to your progress of getting up. And that at certain points when you stop, you have no choice, but you'd have to just roll right back down and start afresh. And that's the sort of feeling that I felt I had for a while there. There's been a couple of times where we've gotten up a bit and then it's actually, no, let's roll back down and have another take at this sort of thing.
Yeah, right.
But then there are other times when you're going to have to just keep the foot down, and to lose it would be really detrimental to the direction that you're trying to get to. And so, like, for example, with us saving, we could get to a point where you're starting to get a bit of substance, and a bit of finances building up, and then all of a sudden you could go, oh, we've got enough that we could just buy a car now and get rid of this little rattle Barina. But that would be to completely ruin the momentum that we've built and not get us to the goal. And so then there are moments where you got to keep it down. Maybe you got to pivot around a few things like expenses or something if the momentum that you're building towards is finances. But I think that applies across so many areas of life. That's the way that you navigate things to keep momentum, because, in certain stages you're revving hard. It's hard work. You've got to keep the foot down. But it's that hard work and keeping that tension and that momentum that can allow you to really coast down the hill once you've climbed it. Right. And build momentum and speed and growth and things like that. So I've been thinking a lot about that.
It's a great thought. It's a really cool analogy of momentum, and I like the idea of going up a hill. And there are appropriate times to go back, reassess. Yeah. And then there are times when, no, this is just too important. I think saving for a house, at your age, where you guys are at, where you're at career-wise, it's like if you're not careful, and owning a home's not everything. Yeah. There are other, especially in the bigger cities now, a lot of people are just going, no, that's not even on the table. But for most Aussies, especially at the moment, still in rural Australia, it's a really attainable way to set yourself up for the future. Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense for retirement and all those things. Yeah. And so it's an important goal, and you can see that if you're not careful, if you guys back out now and go, let's just buy the car, and then life changes can happen, you get some additional responsibility, and you just end up on that thing of never having that opportunity
just on the treadmill, and you stay in that little loop. And it doesn't take all that much longer. And the important thing is the tension. Like there's a tension in gaining momentum. When you're in the early gears, we've talked before about, the analogies of gears, and they can give a good picture. You're revving your guts out in first and second and third to get yourself until things are really cranking in fifth. And yeah, so it's just important to hold on to that tension, walk that line, keep yourself focused on the end goal, and staying positive as you walk there, finding ways to enjoy little wins along the way, and recognizing your progress whilst keeping that tension as you climb towards wherever it is that you're trying to get. And so, you know, for us, it's a sort of financial goal at the moment, but maybe it's for someone, it's they want to get to a certain position in a business. And so you're recognizing, okay, this role that I'm in right now, I feel is below my potential, but I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to engage with it. I'm going to be all in to this position, because that's how you get yourself to keep progressing up, you know.
I think a lot of, like, a wise life is knowing, being able to identify those things where, no, this is so important and the timing is so vital, we need to keep going.
Yeah.
And actually knowing, no, this is something that isn't as important, or because of the timing, I can go back down and have another go. And identifying a situation, you know, and responding the correct way. Yeah. That's wisdom, isn't it? That's where I think you do need to bring people in and speak into your life and help you go, hang on, is this something I can reassess? And like you alluded to earlier, I think your 20s, let's switch to that analogy of the gears. All right, so your earlier years, your 20s and even into your early 30s, you might be in second gear, really, in life. You know, I hope that my most effective years, where I don't have to put much effort in to have an incredible effect, is in my 50s and 60s, when you've got the runs on the board, you've learned a lot of lessons, you know, and you should have gained respect by them. Yeah. Where you don't, as a leader, as a family member, you just don't have to put the same level of energy in to get the same level of results. Yeah. And that's a whole idea of this analogy. And when you're a young person, you know, you've got to work a bit harder, and rightly so. But also, if you go from second gear back down to first, you lose a lot less momentum than if you're in fifth gear and you want to go all the way back down to first. And so I think those early years, it's part of the beauty of being young, that you can go back down and change direction or change things.
And things
and especially we just live in a great time in history and a great nation that affords us that ability. And I don't think that should be seen, and we shouldn't look at the generation who take advantage of that and try different careers as though that's some sort of character fault. Yeah. They're actually just taking advantage of the time and the season that we live in, where you can do that.
Got an absolute abundance of options that just wasn't even an option, you know.
Yes.
50 years ago.
Yeah. But the key is identifying, you know, so I would say, for example, for me, marriage, you just got to keep ploughing that thing ahead, whether it's great or whether you're getting the wobbles a bit. You've got to find a way to keep working. That's not one, and that's not to have a crack at anyone who's had to withdraw. There are legitimate reasons where, you know, if things have got toxic or abusive, you need to get out and get healthy. Yeah. But, you know, in a general healthy marriage, you want to go, yep, even as good as it is, you're going to have those wobbly moments. But it's like, no, this is vital. We're ploughing ahead. My key relationships, we're going to keep ploughing ahead. Saving for a house, we're going to keep ploughing ahead. But identifying those other things where it's actually okay to drop back, that's the key of I reckon that's one of the really keys of a well-lived life. Yeah, it's a really interesting thought.
Now we've got a new segment.
A new segment. Looking forward to this one.
Yeah. What is it?
Questions without notice. Whoa, the producer's in the house.
Yeah, the producer is giving us sound effects without notice. What is that one?
It sounds like the play school. Which window are we going through today?
Ooh, the
arch window?
Okay. Do you have a question without notice?
I did have a question without notice, and it is completely gone after that conversation that we got into that was really fascinating.
I'm trying to think of a question without notice for you. Have you ever bowled spin for a cricket team?
No. Best I don't.
For some reason, Warnie just came into my head when I was looking at you.
Did he?
Yeah.
No, cricket. I played one season of cricket very poorly. I like indoor cricket to play, but cricket would be the sport I was probably the least skilled in.
Yeah, I was pretty terrible. I hit a 4 once. I took my helmet off and celebrated.
Like it was a century.
I wasn't because I wasn't actually officially on the team. They were playing in their under-18s, and I had never played cricket growing up. I just only played AFL. They were all in the team, but they used to often not have enough numbers. So if they didn't have enough numbers, I would play. They'd always send me out to open, telling me, "Yeah, cutters, you're a really good blocker. You're a really good blocker." It's like they're putting themselves in at number 6 so that they can just come and tonk them.
Yeah.
I was like, "You jerks!"
Yeah.
And they're like,
Go take the shine off the ball, cutters.
My mate's dad going, "What are you doing sending him out first for? You boys are jerks." And then one day I went out and I'm just swinging at everything, couldn't hit anything, and then I just connected one, sent it right over to the boys in the crowd, so I just gave a little celebration.
Nice.
And then there was another day where we had an actual really good player in the team. He was playing like first grade in Canberra, but he still came and played with us in under-18s. He was running late one day, they all told me, "You got to stay in until he gets here." And so I'm out there trying to like block everything, not do anything stupid, and just like I stayed out there for like an hour and a half and got like 9 runs.
Did you make it?
Well, I think he made it.
Yeah. Well, you made it. You survived for long enough for him to arrive.
Yeah. Good times.
Yeah, nicely done.
Yeah. Well, do we want to move into Luke?
Let's do it.
So we have.
Oh, we're back out of the questions without notice zone.
And we're back. Thanks for joining us. So we have launched into the book of Luke now, and we're starting to read through it. Do you want to give us a bit of an overview of the book of Luke?
Yeah, so Luke is written by Luke, funnily enough. Yeah, also the author of Acts. So Luke, Acts go together like a sequel.
Ooh.
Which is really cool. Luke obviously telling the gospel, the story of Jesus, and then Acts telling the story of the early church.
Yeah.
And Luke, his name's not actually mentioned in, Luke.
Yeah.
But they know that he wrote it, especially when we look at Acts, there's a lot of we sections. So we did this and we did that.
Yeah.
And by process of elimination of the people that could possibly be talking about, you come out that Luke is actually the author of both of these. So Luke is obviously a really great friend of the Apostle Paul's, which I think in itself would just be what a fascinating life that would give you.
That would be quite an intense life.
Oh, I reckon Paul's one of the most intriguing characters in the Bible. Anyway, so what we know about Luke is that he is a second generation Christian in the early church. He was a Gentile, and he was a physician by profession. Often also known as a historian and artist. So they think that he was both a really intelligent, well-educated guy, but also incredibly creative.
Yeah.
So himself a fascinating figure. He's a man of great education and creativity. And probably one of the things I love about Luke is that he is a Gentile New Testament believer adding to Scripture, which in itself is just the gospel in action.
Yeah, it's really, it's a testimony in and of itself, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And to be, incredible friends with Paul and to have the intellect, like he addresses the book to Theophilus, and by the way that the greeting that he uses, it's apparent that he's a person of prestige and wealth. Yeah. Some believe that he may have actually been a patron of Luke, so someone who sponsored Luke and enabled Luke to get on and do the ministry.
Yeah.
But obviously he was the kind of person, much like Paul himself, who had incredible intellect. But, again, I think some of the great things that we see in especially the Gospels and Acts, it's not just the doctrine and theology that's clearly explained within the text, but the things you see lived out, like the fact that we have this Gentile believer in the New Testament adding to Scripture itself. Also the fact that you got guys like Luke and Paul who are really well-educated, intelligent, influential. They mix it with the wealthy, but their heart is always for all people. Yeah. And they don't ever use their intellect. Certainly when Paul was Saul, he did, but they don't use their position, their intellect, any of those things to puff themselves up. Like Paul just becomes a servant of all. There's that Christ-like attitude within them.
Yeah. Willing to pivot for whoever he's talking to and engage them where they're at in life, and whether that's extremely intelligent or the lowly,
the more uneducated, which was, prevalent in those times. Paul was willing to, find a way to engage and relate to humanity. Which I think is that's something we need to take out of all of this. As you read through the Gospels, Jesus talks about it a lot. Even in my reading yesterday, I think it was in Luke 6, Jesus was accused of being the friend of tax collectors and sinners. And it's interesting to think that he didn't just have incidental interactions with tax collectors and sinners. It wasn't just that as he walked through the streets as the teacher with his disciples that these people came to him, and he didn't just tolerate those incidental interactions, but he actually did go out of his way to connect. It even says that he was laying at the table and dining with them, which in Jewish culture was to break bread, was to welcome someone in. It was to say that there's a relationship here.
To identify with them. And
and he was willing to do that. Now, he always did that to be a great influence. But we see over and over again, whether it be that Jesus would reach out and touch lepers and ceremonially that was supposed to make him unclean, but actually it would make them clean. And so there's this constant story of that going on as well, that he didn't just go and mingle with the sinners and get lost in that. But at the same time, he was not afraid of the judgment that would come by not just having incidental interactions with people that are seen as outcasts, but actually building them into his life and being present with them and building relationship with them. And so I think any time that I begin to feel that, what are people going to think? Should I be that close to this situation? It's like, you know what? So long as I'm living righteously, I should just be absolutely willing to get about anybody on the face of the planet, because that's how Jesus lived. That's how Paul lived. That's how Luke lived.
It's what it looks like truly to live for the approval of one.
Right.
Truly living for God.
Yes.
And that all you're doing is knowing that within yourself you're right with him and doing what you think he would desire of you in that moment. And it's amazing how radically different our lives could look if we really absorbed that and lived that.
Well, someone I would think of in that just passed away in the last couple of weeks. One of my heroes in the faith is Rabbi Zachariah. One of the greatest teachers on the face of the planet. We're certainly going to miss him, but his legacy lives on. And he was such an intelligent man, like ridiculously well read. I used to listen to him speak and think, how do you have time to do these speaking engagements and all that reading that you do? He must have spent every flight reading. He was so well read, very intelligent. His ability to memorize scripture and memorize quotes from philosophers and theologians and all sorts. And yet he would go to universities or he'd go into Islamic nations and places like this, and he always treated his questioners with the utmost respect. He never used his knowledge or his intelligence to denigrate. He'd never accused someone of asking a bad question or a silly question. He would thank them. He would, even if it was almost a hostile question, rather than take that personally, he would acknowledge why it was such an important question to ask. And I just think he was a phenomenal example in living like that.
I remember watching a clip of him talking about how he actually got asked by the Mormon church to go and speak at one of their big sort of churches. And he was sort of a bit taken by it. And he told her, and I forget what he said he was going to preach on, but he told her, I'll come, but I'm choosing what I preach. And because they had been led to want to ask him to come and preach to their church. And he told him exactly what he was going to be preaching, which pretty much goes against some of the fundamental theology. And they went, we think you need to come preach here. And so he's gone there, preached exactly what he wanted to preach, but with no issues of being there. And copped heaps of flack. Is Zachariah now a Mormon and all this stuff?
Yep.
And he's just like, I'll preach there.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you? It's
Right.
like, that's the whole point. You're not trying to just talk to the crowd that's already on board with everything you're saying.
Yeah.
It's about sharing our thoughts and beliefs with people in a respectful way. And yeah, brilliant guy. So we've sort of just started reading it. Something that was sort of standing out to me was you've got these. It actually feels a lot like my life at the moment. Everyone around you having babies. So you're sort of following the story of John the Baptist being born, and then also the birth of Jesus, and the sort of underpinning stories of that, and visitations and coming from angels. And it was interesting with John's dad. I remember listening to Bill Johnson talking about that. So he was visited when he was in the temple because he was a priest, and he's gone in to pray, and the angels come to him, and then he's doubted what the angels spoke, and so he's had his tongue, he couldn't speak for the entirety of the pregnancy. And the thought that Bill Johnson had around it was this idea of stopping him from able to speak so that he couldn't speak that doubt over what God was doing in this process. And he was sort of silenced up until that moment. And I can just imagine it's like you're just left with nothing to do but contemplate what's actually about to happen and coming to grips with it and stuff like that. And so it's quite a powerful story coming together of John the Baptist coming in to earth, and the fulfillments that God's bringing into their life. They've been barren for their whole life, and this an amazing picture of how God works, that he's not just like, even when he's trying to set up some of the biggest stuff in history, he's always interested in the small. And so this intimately intertwined with the small things of life. And here he is meeting this woman who's been barren and fulfilling all those longings in her heart, whilst also preparing the way for the salvation of humanity.
Right.
Yeah, so it's just an amazing picture of God's heart through all of that.
That's a really cool idea. It's that some people want to focus either on God, the saviour of the individual, or God, the saviour of humanity. And my answer is yes.
Yeah.
But he's both.
Yeah.
And he's doing both at the same time. And he has the capacity. Like, you got to think, we're talking about God.
Yeah.
He has the capacity to be concerned with the overall and yet beautifully intertwine individual stories in that picture.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, we'll continue our reading of Luke, and we encourage people to follow along with us as we read through. But for now, you can continue following us on Facebook and Instagram on the GC Bathurst page, or you can find us on the Generosity Church YouTube page, and also on Spotify you can find the Courageous Influence Talk Show. So for now, we'll see you around.
All right.